Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Dunedin City Council. Welcome to councillors, to staff, to the media and to the public. Our opening prayer today will be led by Alti Sannyasi from the Baha'i community. Welcome.
O divine providence, this assemblage is composed of thy friends who are attracted to thy beauty and are set ablaze by the fire of thy love. Turn these souls into heavenly angels, resuscitate them through the breath of thy Holy Spirit, grant them eloquent tongues and resolute hearts, bestow upon them heavenly power and merciful susceptibilities. Cause them to become the promulgators of the oneness of mankind, and cause the cause of love and concord in the world of humanity, so that the perilous darkness of ignorant prejudice may vanish through the light of the Sun of Truth. This dreary world may become illumined. This material realm may absorb the rays of the world of spirit. These different colors may merge into one color, and the melody of praise may rise to the kingdom of thy sanctity. Verily, thou art the omnipotent and the almighty. Abdul-Baha.
Kia ora, Alti. Now, councillors, there are no apologies, so move on to confirmation of the agenda. I move from the chair that we confirm the agenda with the alteration in regard to Standing Order 2.1 Option C be adopted in relation to moving and seconding and speaking to amendments. Seconded Councillor Staines. All those in favour please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Declarations of interest. Are there any amendments, additions, deletions? In that case, I'll move that Council notes the elected members' interest register attached as attachment A, confirms the proposed management plan for elected members' interests and notes the executive leader team's interest register. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 6, on to confirmation of minutes. The ordinary council meeting of 6th of May, I'll move that council confirms the public part of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting of 6th of May as a correct record. Second to Councillor Staines. Is there any discussion on that? I'll put it. All those in favour please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Minutes of committees. Community and Culture Committee. Councillor Hawkins.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. I'll move that Council note the minutes of the Community and Culture Committee meeting held on the 16th of April 2019.
Second, Councillor Laufiso. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 8, Planning and Environment Committee. Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move the Council note the minutes of the Planning and Environment Committee held on the 16th of April 2019.
Second, Councillor Statement. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that the Council notes the minutes of the Otago Peninsula Community Board 14th of March, Strathtyra Community Board 14th of March, Mosgiel Tyra Community Board 20th of March, West Harbour Community Board 20th of March and Saddle Hill Community Board 21st of March.
Second, Councillor Staines. Any discussion on any of those? I'll put that collective. All those in favour please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, on to the reports proper. Item 14, I think we are up to, Dunedin Performing Arts Feasibility Study Phase 1 report. Welcome, Mr. Pickford. Mr. Dixon and would you like to introduce this or go straight into questions, or whichever?
I think happy to take questions. I would like to introduce to Council Ms Erin Shepherd, who is a consultant on the Charcoal Blue team and has led the consultative process that has resulted in this Phase 1 report.
Actually, I just would actually like to thank and acknowledge the enormous amount of consultation support we've had from the community on this. There's been a significant amount of interest in this study, and particularly want to acknowledge Stage South and CNZ for their support through this. It's been a fantastic process so far, and we've had an enormous amount of response from the community, so thank you to those community stakeholders.
Okay, I'll open it up to questions now, councillors. Anyone with any queries about this? Councillor Lord.
Yeah, I just had a question. So obviously with the Fortune struggling to be survivable, have we also considered the fact that now we've got semis in the equation and money budgeted in the future for that? And are we at risk of making two venues that are struggling to survive, or is it completely separate in size and scale?
Well, this Phase 1 report really has identified the vision, what we need to do to fill the Fortune Theatre-shaped hole that we've got in our creative economy. Later stages of the process will consider options for achieving the vision that's embodied in this report. And obviously the sites and venue and the sites that are available to us will be considered as options against that. So Sammy's, I think it's fair to say, will be an option that's considered, as will the others. But we're not just looking at a site venue and the cost of construction, we're also looking at a business model and an organisational model which will provide the best sustainable future that we can for the performing arts in the city.
Councillor Hawkins. Oh, yeah, you're moving. Any further questions? Councillor Vanders.
Regarding the Fortune Theatre, is it your understanding that if there had been a better business model for the Fortune Theatre, that it could have continued in the Stewart Street building? Or is it your opinion that the building itself created constraints which meant that despite running for decades, the model simply couldn't work there?
So the building did provide significant issues for the successful operation of the theatre. But as our consultants point out in the report, the model of essentially a UK model of a repertory theatre company only really works in a context of a country which has the West End in it, has easy transport, has the ability for audiences to travel from quite a long way. And it describes in quite a lot of detail how that model, which was enthusiastically taken up across Australasia after it was adopted in the UK, has progressively ceased to become a model that works. So there's a variety of factors behind the demise of the Fortune. The building and the site is clearly one of them, but there were others involving the nature of repertory company. Erin, would you like to add something?
Yeah, absolutely. As Nick has touched on, and as the report indicates, I think the term that was used was sort of death by 1,000 cuts. So there was a number of issues that related to the Fortune Theatre and its closure. But I think it's very fair to say that it was an incredibly compromised building, and there are a number of other theatres in Dunedin that have that are also compromised, but that played a huge factor in it as well, and not just for the technicians and the performers, but I think also the audience experience for the Fortune Theatre. The building was really restricted for that as well.
So we understand some of the building restrictions, but my question was actually regarding a different business model. Despite the acknowledged restrictions of the building, and any heritage building will have restrictions, was there, in your opinion, a business model that could have continued to work satisfactorily at the Fortune, given that it had worked already for 40 years?
Well, I think that elements of the business model are tied up in the degree to which the facility could offer a variety of income streams. They're tied up with the programmatic choices that have been made. They're tied up with the quality or otherwise of the audience experience. And it's a complicated mix, but I think it needs to be understood in its full complexity if we are to ensure, which is the underlying purpose of this study, that whatever we come up with has a sustainable basis in business terms, in its business model, in its program, and its engagement with audiences, and in its functionality as a site and a venue.
Just to finally cover it off, and picking up on Councillor Lord's question, do you think that Sammy's, with its constraints, would offer a much better venue potential with a different business model to be sustainable ongoing?
That is a consideration for the next phase of this study. We're taking the time to do this in a deliberate way to make sure that we understand the fundamentals and understand the issues that have got us to where we are. We now, with this report, have that, and we are now going to be able to rigorously appraise with the architect agency that's part of this consultancy the suitability of Sammy's and other sites, and that will be a rigorous architectural and organisational and business review.
So just to clarify that last statement, does this mean that the Fortune Theatre building itself, the Lawson building in Stewart Street, is no longer going to be considered as a theatre, or it's no longer going to be considered as a venue because of its constraints?
We are about to embark on the process of identifying the site options, but I have to say that's very likely that it won't be one of those options.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, and thank you for your report. It's really good. I was just wondering, there seem to be a number of different size spaces that you need. Could you clarify those? The different audience sizes?
So we have sort of identified that mid-sized theatre, and we were hesitant at the end of this phase 1 report to really drill down into a number, because that's part of the phase 2. But when we say mid-size, I think we can probably say out loud we're looking at around 300 to 500 flexible black box type space, with additional other spaces that support that could potentially also offer performance as well, for audiences to come and watch. We're talking about making spaces, rehearsal workshops and things like that. So there are a number of different things. We're going to drill down into that a bit more in the coming weeks with the team, which include JazzMax Architecture, and we'll put together the functional brief of what the sort of hub that we're thinking about looks like.
So you're thinking a hub model where there's a lot of different spaces that work together and can be flexible?
We are thinking about a number of different spaces, and part of phase 2 will be we'll be exploring whether they all sit on one site, or there could be an opportunity to disperse some of those spaces out as well amongst Dunedin.
Thank you.
Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for the report. I think it's a wonderful step. As you said, there is a huge fortune-sized hole in our creative landscape at the moment, and it's been felt by many. You just made a comment, Nick, that I thought was interesting, in the sense that you mentioned the catchment and the repertory setup requires a larger catchment or a public transport system. Are we doomed to a certain degree by the size of our catchment, and is it always going to need propped up?
Well, the report identifies that the model that's successful theatre companies in our kind of location and with our kind of resident population adopt is to start to produce tours. Because basically the fixed costs of producing a production are the same whether you run it for 3 weeks in your venue or you tour it for 6 months around the country. And so the strategy that's been identified in here that companies throughout Australasia have generally adopted is to become much more active in generating shows that can then tour. And part of that, so that then feeds back into what kind of spaces this facility would require and what kind of additional back office functionality it would require.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Ms Shepherd, for your very thorough report. I have a question around when is theatre professional and when it's amateur, and I asked this question at the Grants Subcommittee on which I sit. And just to give the context of my question, I'm a great believer in that out of crisis comes opportunity, and what I've observed being on that Grants Subcommittee is the emergence of quite a number of theatre companies and theatre productions that weren't happening otherwise. And I asked the question about professionalism, and I was really taken with on page 72. It talks about it is perceived that there are no professional performing arts in Dunedin because few practitioners can be paid for their skills and are able to create work full time. However, while much work is voluntary, professionalism is about expertise. Would you like to enlarge upon that, about how you see professional theatre versus amateur?
Absolutely. It's a discussion that myself and my colleagues have had extensively throughout this process, and I would imagine it's an ongoing discussion as well. And it's not just a Dunedin problem. I think it could be a New Zealand issue in terms of how we view the performing arts, and in terms of, we've been saying value as well. We're talking about people being able to pull a salary and a living wage. There are, as we've discovered, an incredible amount of people in Dunedin in the southern region who have expertise, knowledge, and who are making performing arts at an incredibly high level here. And when you dive deeper into, does that reflect in terms of them having a salary and being able to pull a wage that they can pay bills with? Sometimes that doesn't. Those two things have a slight disconnect, and like I say, it's not a Dunedin issue, it can be a New Zealand problem. So it's something that we're really mindful of, and as we go into this options phase and we talk about operating models, which are funding as well feeds into that, and residencies, that issue is on the forefront of our minds in terms of how we're going to approach these operating models and what we would put forward as a successful option so that people are getting paid. I should say as well that myself and Dorita, my colleague, who's just sitting over there, we're about to head off to the Prague Quadrennial, and New Zealand has 5 performing arts experts who will be exhibiting there, and out of those 5, 2 of them are from Dunedin. So that just goes to show, when we talk about these expertise, the level that is being produced here in the southern region, and then it's about supporting that.
Thank you. And my second question is around venue, and I know that's the next stage, but I just have a question of clarification. So on page 72, you also say, the consensus is therefore for a relaxed, welcoming, well-designed and somewhat gritty environment that is contemporary but not institutional or precious. I'm really keen to hear a little bit more about that at this stage, because it seems like that's the nub of what people are looking for.
That's correct, and I think it was a conversation we had on day one about not building a marble palace, and I'm sure that resonates with a lot of people here. Again, drilling into the history of Dunedin, there is that amazing relationship with the Dunedin sound and people innovating and creating amazing performing artworks here that need a certain amount of, I think, flexibility and opportunity to have spaces where they can explore ideas. So it's not about, we've discovered very quickly, it's not about putting an institution in place that has tight constraints, but instead we're looking at spaces where giving people that opportunity to really explore and think and create a creative space, which I think is why we're very interested in having supporting spaces, not just a place to have a performance, but also places that you can workshop ideas. You can do scratch shows, so things that aren't quite finished off or quite polished, and invite people to see those. So it's that marries into the sort of larger hub idea that we'll be exploring a lot during this phase 2.
No further questions? Councillor Wiley? Sorry, I thought you were indicating you wanted to move.
No, Councillor Hawkins had done that. I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but in the attachment document we have on page 58, it talks about other venues. And there's a great map of where the venues are and some comments around where positives and negatives around them. The question I've got is, was there no consideration given to the schools, like Kings and Queens Auditorium or the other auditoriums around the city with the high schools?
We did map out the schools as well, especially Kings and Queens that you mentioned. The DSO, I believe, has a relationship with certain school auditorium that they use. So we have mapped those out. We also received a bit of feedback around the use of those spaces and how that's compromised due to having to work around term times and other things like that. So that has factored into our overall ecology that we're sort of approaching here in terms of the ecology of the performing arts and the venues that exist.
Right, so no more questions. Councillor Hawkins, you are moving, and I think Councillor Wilson is seconding, so you wish to speak to this?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and I pass on my thanks too to the Charcoal Blue team and to staff for their work, but also echo the comments made by Mr Pickford in passing on my thanks to our performing arts community for the generosity of their unpaid energy in putting this work together. And this is a community that are at risk of being consulted to death, I would argue. A lot of work in the late 2000s around the provision or otherwise of a mid-sized theatre venue in Dunedin, the Deloitte report, etc. And then the consultation around Aratoi or Te Pōti, our arts and culture strategy not that long ago, and then a consultation around the future use of SAMIs. And now this process looking at all of the above and more, and I would hazard a guess that I don't think we'll get another opportunity to capitalise on their goodwill in terms of trying to figure out what the future of provision might look like. There's nothing new in this report really, but it is useful, I think, to have a consensus view around what the landscape looks like currently, that it's a difficult place to make a living, that we've got a number of performance spaces with significant challenges, that we're producing exceptional work in spite of those difficulties, that the lack of suitably sized venues is a missed opportunity, not just for local producers of work, but for local audiences in terms of what can and can't tour here, that the repertory model is broken, and that most notably there's a lack of iwi identity and suitability in terms of performance spaces in the city. And I think that any of the solutions, and that comes in phase 2 and phase 3 obviously, and needs to address all of these in such a way that it supports both artist development and audience development, because the two live off each other, so to speak. I certainly echo the comments made in Councillor Gary's questions around what's happening currently, and through the grants subcommittee and through the Professional Theatre Fund, we're seeing a lot. I mean, yes, it's a fracturing our performing arts community, but it's certainly, there's a lot of exciting things happening. We have companies of young artists producing contemporary work, and we have a summer Shakespeare company, we have people still producing light popular comedy, we have site-specific local stories being told, rather than a repertory company that is trying to deliver all of those things to all of those people. In saying that, I acknowledge that as a result of that fracturing, it is a lot harder for practitioners now that there is less steady work available in that field. So I don't want to let my excitement diminish how difficult the last year or two have been for producers and for practitioners in this community. But I'm excited by what we've got in front of us today and what will come in the next phases in terms of what that can do to support that community and to make the future a more robust one for performing arts in the city. Thank you.
Speakers. Councillor Vandevers.
I've been to a lot of auction sales in my day, and a lot of them have been unhappy experiences. Often they're businesses that have failed. By far the saddest auction that I've been to was the auction of all the lighting, the drapes, the sound systems, the sets, the props of the Fortune Theatre. The Fortune Theatre has been part of my experience of Dunedin for many decades, and ever since I was a councillor, we have been made aware that it was a difficult business model to run, that these kind of productions are inherently very expensive, and that there had been times in the past when we thought, unless someone can really pull a rabbit out of the hat, we're going to lose it. But it seemed to come back. And it came back at least 3 or 4 times that I know of in the last 30-odd years. The last time it came back with a real vitality, with a vengeance almost, was when Lara McGregor was involved in directing productions. I want to pay tribute now to Lara McGregor's extraordinary energy in creating a Fortune Theatre not that long ago that was vital, that filled houses, and that gave us a quality and intensity of theatre experience that I had never hoped to see here in Dunedin. I was particularly moved when there was a production here where the 2 most memorable protagonists were a good ideas bear and a bad ideas bear. Now, if you know this theatre production, you'll know that it's very funny, it's very rude, and very revealing. I saw this production at the Fortune Theatre and I thought, that is absolutely amazing. I don't imagine how anyone could do it better. And then a year later, I happened to be in New York and happened to see the same production in New York. And guess what? The Fortune Theatre one nailed it. The New York one was great, but the Fortune Theatre one, even with the lesser resources, even with the less fancy technology, absolutely nailed that production. So all credit to not just Lara McGregor, but all the people that have made over many years some fabulous entertainment and insight at the Fortune Theatre. Since this may be the last opportunity, and since we have had confirmation that the Fortune Theatre is certainly not to be anymore in that particular building, and I'm very sorry to hear that, I feel that I sort of, well, I'm turning this into some kind of eulogy. It's a eulogy, though, that I feel is really quite awkward. Because in my own mind, and although this report has thrown some light on it, in my own mind, I'm still not sure whether the Fortune Theatre died of natural causes or whether it died from some kind of neglect, whether its management and bureaucracy was too top-heavy. I notice in the auction sale that there were 13 computers that were auctioned that had been used at the Fortune Theatre. I could understand, having been in theatre businesses as a lighting and sound supplier for many, many years. I supplied most of the equipment to the Fortune. I can understand there being 2 or even 3 computers there, but 13 of them, I really do wonder. Whatever happened at the Fortune Theatre, in terms of a business model, I think it's very important that we ask some hard questions about why it failed after all that time, and make sure that whatever new business model we have does not make those same mistakes. Thank you.
Further speakers? Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the writers of this report, this review. It is informative, it's comprehensive, it's analytical, but the thing I really like about it is it's dispassionate. It points up lacks, weaknesses, gaps, and doesn't apportion blame at all. It just says, these are the problems. We haven't got engagement with mana whenua as we ought to. There's compromised facilities, the model's wrong, but no point in apportioning blame, because that doesn't help you to get to what the problem is. So I think this is an exceptionally good report. And I know, and Councillor Vandervis has pointed out that, quite rightly, that at the time when Lara McGregor was active at the Fortune, some wonderful productions were mounted, and the place still couldn't be viable. That's because the model was wrong. No one's fault, just no one to blame. So thank you for that. It's very, very good, and I look forward to the next stage, which will be the next identification of options, as I understand it. So, Councillor Hawkins, do you wish to? Okay. I'm going to put this. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you all. Now on to, you're hanging around, Simon, for e-scooters and whatnot. Thank you, Aaron. Item 15, e-scooter safety. Simon, do you wish to... Oh, company. Welcome, Anne. Welcome, Adrian. Thank you.
Happy to take questions.
No need for an introduction. Questions, councillors? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to understand the 12 months trial, because 12 months is a relatively long period, and I appreciate that that ensures that we get this going and see students and how people use it over the summer. But if we find there are issues in that time, it's very hard to claw it back, and I'm just wondering how why you're thinking of a 12-month trial. I can't think of many other things we trial over that such a long period.
We were thinking along the lines that you just said, Councillor Wilson, in terms of summer, winter, and students, I suppose, in the use 12 months. But yeah, that was just our thinking.
But it could equally be a shorter time period if you wished. It's fine.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you, Your Worship. In terms of pedestrian safety, and general management of the whatever might be out there, the mobile review of the mobile trading and temporary stall bylaw will catch operators, but clearly won't catch the individual owners of e-scooters or whatever. Can we assume from what you're proposing that in terms of the evolving environment, you're relying on whatever work NZTA might be coming up with to manage that side of the equation?
Through the chair, it would be interesting to see what NZTA come up with, because whatever they may choose to regulate, I'm not presupposing, but if there was, maybe they're going to suggest speed limits, maybe they're going to suggest maybe they shouldn't be on the footpath at all. We don't know at this stage. But what we're proposing here is that interim step before the bylaw can be brought in once we've been through that consultation period. And you're correct in that it would really address the operators, the owners of the scooters, as opposed to the riders themselves. There are other mechanisms that could be used. And as technology is evolving, it's becoming easier to do that through GPS geofencing, maybe speed limiting that way. So that would be our proposal at this stage, that the introduction of a voluntary zone where it's 15 kilometres an hour and a lot of communication around that, working with riders, working with the community to promote that strip as being particularly, because it is highly pedestrian. We'll put something in place while we have no regulatory teeth.
Oh, if I could continue, so you'd propose that discussion process and work with with Lime or whomever else, but what capacity do you or we have to interact with the individual owner to encourage any geographic fencing or what's acceptable behaviour when we really don't know who they are, other than by tapping them on the shoulder as they drive down the street or footpath?
So it would be through an education campaign that would be off the back of this. Obviously we're doing, there have been some initiatives around that already. But it would be the operators so it would be Lime or whoever, who we would have to work with to promote this through the app and so on. So when you, perhaps when you start up the app and you're hiring a scooter, you get a message on the screen which they're able to do to remind people if they're going to travel in this courtesy zone, then they have to, we're asking them to keep below a certain speed. And also bear in mind that this is something that the police have endorsed in terms of an approach, and have said that they will, they'll be willing to police it in the sense that it's a reminder to people. And they have done some enforcement of this in terms of safe riding, but they believe that this approach that we can take is a good one around education and reminding riders, but also the wider community around that this is a zone that it sort of becomes almost self-policing, that it gives that people the power to sort of say, hey, look, slow down, you're going too fast. So given we don't have any regulatory teeth at the moment, this is probably a good way forward.
Councillor Elder.
Someone approached me the other day and they saw this person walking along the stick and they bumped a...
Could you put your microphone?
Oh, sorry. They bumped a scooter over, and then a whole lot of scooters fell over in front of that because the person couldn't see it. And one of the issues is a health and safety issue around obstacles on the footpath. And I was wondering whether there's any teeth to say, well, actually, you should put them here or there.
Go on.
In terms of any agreement we have with Lime, if we're aware of any issues where there are particular hazards, we can talk to Lime about that, or any other scooter provider in due course. In terms of other hazardous obstacles on the footpath, that is something that could be looked at as part of the mobile trading or temporary stalls bylaw, possibly. We're looking at various aspects that we can look into with the bylaw review.
So my understanding then is under the bylaw review, we can perhaps say you can put them here or there to keep people safe on the footpath.
So that is one aspect of the review that will be considered.
Thank you.
Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much. Just wondering, have you any timeline on possible central government laws and regulations?
Through the Chair, at this stage they've just advised us that it will be sometime this year.
The other thing is, can the current crop of Lime scooters that we have be geofenced?
In terms of speed, we don't believe. The way that the geofencing works, as we understand it, it wouldn't be accurate enough to know that the rider was on the footpath. So it wouldn't be able to restrict speed that way as easily. We have been approached by another provider who says that they can provide geofencing, but I don't think any of those will be able to limit it to the degree that we might wish. But certainly we're being promised by another provider that they could create no-go zones, for example. So if you enter an area that's actually prohibited, such as the Botanic Garden, it would slow to a stop safely, and you wouldn't be able to leave to leave your finish your ride at that point. So that would be a good step forward from the technology point of view to allow us to limit them.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Am I correct in suggesting that this is effectively establishing a courteous behaviour on the footpath rather than an allowance to something that we wouldn't otherwise allow? I mean, is it correct already that the scooters are allowed on the footpath now by law?
Yes, exactly that. And this is really acknowledging that they can be there as of right, but if you are using them to have a degree of courtesy and awareness of pedestrians and other footpath users.
So it's not a, we're not creating a more permissive environment and encouraging scooters onto the footpaths. We're actually saying if you're on the footpath, please consider where you are and abide by these suggestions.
Exactly.
Right, so when it comes to, I mean, how long we run it for as a trial, we're not adding anything here, right? We're really just starting to do a definition of the environment.
Yes, that's correct. And I suppose the key thing, part of the of this trial, is that we will do measurements, and we have obviously been, we do collate any incidents, numbers of incidents, which are actually very, very low anyway. But it will be something we'll be monitoring to see whether we get an improvement of perception of safety as well, which came through very strongly in that previous report. People felt they were unsafe on the footpath. And by implementing this, we'll be interested to revisit that to see whether people feel that it's actually a safer place.
Right. And to what extent is transport being involved in this? Because I can see that this has got a regulatory side of it, but obviously it's part of our transport network as well.
Transportation have been involved. They are very supportive of it. And if the council decides or resolves to proceed with it, they will very much be involved in implementing it. And they've also involved urban design.
And are we communicating directly, do we have direct communications with NZTA and the Ministry of Transport as they establish their accessible streets concepts, or are we just waiting for them to come out with something?
Been encouraging them. The council has written to them, we've received a response, and we will be following up again to make sure that they do proceed with this work as soon as they practically can.
But are we able to help or have any influence on the design of what they are planning to come up with? Or, I mean, obviously we're waiting for them to finish, but one of the concepts you've just pointed here is that they're on the footpath. Are we able to bring any ideas to them to be included in their thinking?
So they have indicated that they, once they come up with this package, then there'll be full consultation, including with council. So I suppose the answer is no, that we haven't had a direct conversation with them, but we have obviously shared with them our experiences, and they're very interested in knowing what's been happening in Dunedin, particularly because we don't have a set of bylaws that are able to control e-scooters. But I guess through that public consultation process, we'll be able to feedback more specifically.
Thanks.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to you all and the team who've put so much effort into this particular topic. I have two questions. The first one is a little of a devil's advocate question, although I know that from the most vulnerable in our community this is of pivotal importance, and that is that if you get hit at 15 kilometres an hour by a lime scooter, you're still going to have some substantial injury if you're frail, versus if you're hit by a lime scooter faster, it's probably going to be more injury. why did you choose the 15?
The Chair, we based that on the what was happening in Auckland at the time. So they're recommending a 15-kilometre-an-hour limit. So it was not exactly arbitrary, but it was a figure we felt mirrored other parts of the country and what they're approaching. It could be lower, and I do take your point. If you're hit by a scooter at that 15 kilometres, it still would be a significant knock for somebody, especially a frail person.
Thank you. And so I hear consistency is basically the answer. And my second question is around a comms plan, because going forward, depending on whatever we decide, communicating to our community, I get a sense that, and I'm interested to know if this is your experience. My indication from the community is, well, we know the limitations in regards to e-scooters and the tools we have or do not have to affect it, their use in our city. The community is still really confused about it. So do we have a clear comms plan for delineating the different threads, be it the helmet, the speeds, and so on and so forth, and who's responsible and where that work is up to?
In terms of a comms plan, I mean, in terms of if we implement this zone, then it would be something that obviously we would communicate through multiple channels. In terms of responsibilities, it is something that we do address when we have inquiries made to us around, well, can you do something around helmets? So if someone calls the CSA and wants to know why we aren't implementing either a ban or requiring people to wear helmets, then the CSA have a set of FAQs which they can respond using. So I think we need to work on more of a comms plan around some of these things, around the implementation of this. We haven't worked on it yet, given we're waiting for a council decision, but that will be something that we can cover off as part of that exercise.
Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I just had a question regarding, Christine sort of asked it, but I was going to ask the question, is there any reason, or is it possible that we could actually trial at 5 kilometres an hour? Because I think you get an old person smacked at 15k, that's a pretty solid sort of a tackle, and I know we can't stop them being on the footpaths, so is there any reason we can is it possible that we could lower that speed limit to 5 kilometres an hour to actually drive them back onto the roads where they probably belong?
The Chair, it's a trade-off. I guess the benefit of using a scooter is that you can get from A to B, and if you're doing it at 5 kilometres an hour, just slightly above walking pace, then it would be potentially safer than it would be if it's 15 kilometres an hour. The data that we reported back on through the March report indicated there were actually, I don't think there were any collisions that we recorded in that 40-hour observation. We've got some preliminary information from the Health Board, who've done a study from ED admissions, and in a 2-month period, there was 1 collision recorded. And I guess it's the scale of the issue that we're trying to deal with, and then putting a 5 kilometre an hour speed limit on for everybody who uses that strip of George Street, Princess Street. It's, and how, I guess, you want people to be responsible, but if you say there's a 5 kilometre an hour limit, perhaps you won't get as much compliance with that than if you set a 15 kilometre an hour limit. It's a trade-off, and it's very hard because people want to get from A to B. But again, it's the council's decision. If we wanted to put a 5 kilometre an hour, you could do that.
I guess the question that comes up in my mind is, would we be better to force them onto the road? So if I was going to hire a scooter and I was time poor and money conscious, I would be thinking, well, I'd be better driving on the road at 15 kilometres an hour or 20 or 25. And it is an area where generally car flows are quite slow. Like I've often driven down there and you're barely doing 20. So the question is, if we made it 5, would we perhaps just make people move onto the road where probably they'd generally be quite safe, and it puts the risk on the scooter user having to be more safety conscious because they are the smaller user, instead of putting the scooter user on the footpath where they become the stronger person or the one more likely to create damage. So.
Yes, the only other comment I would make is that it's if you have a fill of 5 km/h limit, the compliance won't be as high, and I think there is a risk that it's voluntary anyway. So there's no, whether they're travelling 5 km/h or 7 or 15, it's still not enforceable as such. I guess you want to try and bring the community with you. If we're talking about encouraging people to use the roadway as opposed to the footpath, there's probably some other ways of doing that through messaging that we could do as part of the comms plan, encouraging people to use the roadway if they feel safe, but if they are going to use the footpath, then to keep the speed to a reasonable level. As I said before, the number of incidents of actual collisions is very, very low, although any number obviously is not satisfactory. You want to keep that to 0. But we're just trying to reach, I guess, a point of compromise. So there's also a thing around perception of safety for general footpath users, which we're trying to address.
Councillor Wilson.
The first question is, I think, for Ms Graham, and whether she's got any. We were challenged at Public Forum about whether this report was consistent with our previous motions, and I just want to check that out, if I could. Or was it Simon? Mr Pickford.
So I did speak to Ms Yeldon about the reasons she thought that it was inconsistent. I think Ms Yeldon's approach was, well, the previous report should have said that we have no regulatory teeth, we have no ability to prevent these from being here, which I totally agree with. The resolutions which are repeated within the current report, I don't believe, and I don't think we believe here, actually is in contradiction. It talks about recommendation C from the 26th of March, talks about staff will continue to monitor e-scooter use and promote rider and pedestrian safety. This report that we brought to you today, we believe fulfills that. We don't think it's in contradiction.
Thank you. The second question I have is just checking my earlier question about the 3-month trial and potentially coming back, and I don't want to make anything too onerous, but this has been a topic of interest, and if the Ministry of Transport or NZTA came in with other regulatory tools, I'm not quite sure that a 12-month trial, for the same reasons that Councillor Yeldon, that Ms Yeldon said, it would then be contrary to shorten that trial. So I'm just trying to work that way. So would you be happy if it was moved as a 3-month trial with the expectation that you report back and seek extensions if it was working? Would that be too onerous?
My concern would be that 12 weeks isn't really long enough for Lyme to, so perhaps a bit longer than that. I mean, I can see your point though, but is that long enough to actually start to create behaviour change?
I'm more than happy to seek advice, which is the option here. Would you suggest, I just think 12 months is a heck of a long time, and it could cause other issues. What reporting back date, considering there is an election apparently this year, amongst other things, would be satisfactory to you for us to extend that trial to?
What if we just included a note that we could return to you and revoke the trial if it was found to be not working, not proving to be useful, or words to that effect?
Councillor Leofiso.
Thank you, Your Worship. Kia ora koutou, mō tō mahi. Thank you for this work. I'm just referring to the summary of considerations, page 38 of our papers. Engagement external, and it says observational data was gathered at 6 city locations. Did any of those locations include South Dunedin?
No, they were inner city locations and Sinclair Esplanade.
If we did decide to have this trial, etc., and if it was successful, could this courtesy area be extended to South Dunedin or parts thereof, given that, you know, pedestrians there are aged and have long expressed concerns about use of the footpath and safety?
There's no reason why we couldn't do that, and I think the report does talk to the fact once we've done some assessment of how successful the trial has been, then it could be extended out if we think it would be useful.
Councillor van der Wes.
Councillor Wilson has answered my question, my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm sorry, Simon, could you just give us the stats again? Over the 2-month period, how many collisions were there?
There was one admission to the ED department due to a collision with a scooter. That's one, so that was out of 56 e-scooter related injuries. The balance were injuries to the rider coming off.
So there was one, and do we know how serious that injury was?
No, we don't, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Is this trial envisaged to include other forms of wheeled transport that are motorised on our footpaths, for instance, mobility scooters? Given that, as I understand it, by law, you can be a disqualified driver with advanced dementia and you can legally drive a 40 km/h mobility scooter down the pavement, or the road for that matter. So if this is going to apply to young people on e-scooters, does it apply to those? Yes, it does. That's good. Thank you. Councillor Elder.
Thank you. I'm not on a mobility scooter yet, and I haven't been speeding. But the question I have to ask is, well, since Mr Lord had gracefully offered 5 kilometres away an hour, would 10 kilometres an hour be an option rather than 15? Had that option been explored?
The Chair, we haven't done any analysis of 5 versus 10 versus 15. The reason we chose 15 is that it aligns with what Auckland have done, and it felt like a reasonable compromise. Of course, the council can choose to adopt another speed limit if it wishes, but as I say, there's nothing scientific behind that 15.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Have you had any discussions with Lime about education when they get off scooters? Because I notice at intersections they seem to just stop at the traffic lights, hop off and leave them sitting in the middle of the footpath and right at the intersections, and it's happening all over town.
So if there is so the reason we find out about it is that people call us, or and Lime have staff out on the streets, and if they observe them, they'll move them. If they contact us directly through the CSA, we will call Lime, and those staff will go and move them. And they usually do that pretty promptly, but I acknowledge that you know, if someone hops off a scooter and leaves it there, it's an immediate issue for pedestrians.
But when you do log off your scooter, you do get a message saying make sure you park it safely, and you do have to take a photograph of it and send it back showing them where it is. That's GPS tagged, but theoretically if it showed it was somewhere like in the middle of the intersection, then they'd follow you up. But so they do that in education. I think most users do it reasonably sensibly, but some don't.
Yeah, I just notice more and more of them sitting right at the curb in the middle of the walkway at the lights.
Right, if that's all the questions, would someone like to move the recommended resolution? Councillor O'Malley? Second to Councillor Wilson? There's no need to be coy. Did you wish to, what I'm hearing is that there might be an amendment.
Sorry, Your Worship, I'm not going to second it because I think a 6-month trial may be a middle ground from what I've heard around the table, but I'm not quite sure what the resolution was because I think it has to refer to the paper, because the resolution itself, so that's, I have given an amended one to Mrs Adamson.
So hang on, is this, Councillor O'Malley's moving it, Councillor Van Ivers has said he'll second it. Right, now, you're moving what's on the order paper, Councillor O'Malley, or something different?
I think the question is whether it'll be for 12 months and whether or not others would want to have an opportunity to say, should we do it for less than 12?
Right. I understood that what the Chief Executive mentioned was that there could be an allowance for adjustment through the period of...
Yeah. No, I was giving Councillor Wilson an opportunity to...
Right.
to
So, I'm at a loss to know. Councillor O'Malley's moving what's here on the understanding that it can be curtailed. I'm not sure what you've said you've put one up, but are you saying that you're going to move that as an amendment or what, Councillor Wilson? I don't understand. Oh, is there a second if it... Right, Councillor...
I can do that.
Councillor Elder, right. So we've got the recommendation that's on the order paper with the understanding that it can be curtailed for appropriate reasons throughout that trial. Do you wish to speak to this, Councillor O'Malley?
Thanks. As I read this, this is... it's not really, we're not enforcing or making anybody do anything because we don't actually have the authority to do so. So we're creating an environment to get people to start to think about their behaviours and create an environment where we can all move along and live along. And I think that's what I believe I'm supporting here, so I definitely will support it. I think as we go forward, maybe the social response to this is one that we need to start considering, and that is we are got lots of different modes of transport coming towards us, and I'm really interested in what's going to happen with the Accessible Streets movement, because I would say that there's been a lot of people bring up the idea that the footpath is a special zone, and I think it is. It is a place where people can meet and stop and talk, and there's an expectation of low speeds on that environment. Unfortunately, though, if you then put someone on a small vehicle like this out into the road carriage, you're exchanging one risk for another, and we've already had a person hit by a truck. So I think it's a matter probably of establishment relative risk and also perception of risk versus actual risk. And I know that there's a loss of enjoyment with the perception of risk. So even if people aren't being hit, they still perceive they might be. That is a loss of enjoyment on the footpath. So one of the things I'm hoping as we go forward with the Accessible Streets concept is that we actually consider an intermediary zone. I've mentioned this in the past before, so that people on these vehicles that are wanting to travel over 10 kilometres an hour but under 30 have got a zone to go into all of their own, so that we can get them both off the street and off the footpath. That obviously will mean, of course, in high density areas, a significant loss of parking. But in the meantime, I think we don't have much regulatory control, so this is simply a way of establishing a conversation between all users on what is appropriate behaviour. Thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to thank the staff for working their way through this minefield of incapacity to do very much. But I'm moving an amendment because I don't believe that, in line with what's been discussed, because I don't believe there's any place for vehicles other than mobility scooters on footpaths. And I know what the legal situation is, and if we're going to encourage people, I think we need to encourage them to drive at no more than 5 k's on the footpath, and also that the trial should be for 6 months. So I will formally move in that direction. 6 months.
So there are 2 aspects to it, as I understand it. It's 5k in 6 months.
Yep.
And there's a seconder, Councillor Statement. Right, we're now speaking to the amendment. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Statement?
If I could just... the reason I'm backing this up here is the 5Ks is easier to manage. You've got someone walking beside you, so you can actually physically see what speed the scooter's going. If it's going at 10 Ks, it's a bit harder to manage, or 15 Ks, and therefore, the public can look at the person and say, oh, boo-hoo, naughty boy, because obviously we've got no power. So that's the and obviously the collision would be less dangerous if they did happen to collide with someone. As my mother used to say when I was trying to drive her car, and I would say to her, I'm not going to have an accident, she said, well, that's why it's called an accident, you'll never know. So it's the same thing here at the end of the day. Yes, we might not have many incidents at the ED department, but you just never know, and it could actually be someone elderly that's getting smacked. So, we'll just try and lessen those chances if possible.
Now, I've got Councillor Hawkins next. Just to note, Councillor Vandervis, your name was down to speak to the substantive motion, and so you'll be the first in the queue when we come back to whatever the substantive motion is by that time. Councillor Hawkins.
I don't wish to speak to it at this point, but I would request that the two clauses be taken separately.
Okay, that's fine. So in a sense, there's one amendment, two parts. Well, I can handle that. Councillor Lord.
Thank you, Cal. No, look, I'm just happy to say I support that.
I meant it as a title.
Yeah, title. Oh, well, I'll take it as such, Your Honour, Your Worship. No, look, I really do think that's a wise amendment, and I think 5Ks, and if it pushes them onto the streets, I'm not too concerned about that.
Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am concerned about that, because the thing is, if we are going to have a genuine conversation about the health and safety of our residents, I mean, if you want to get brutally honest about this, a collision at 10 kilometres an hour or 15 kilometres an hour or 5 kilometres an hour on the footpath, as opposed to a collision with a truck on the road, I mean, we've seen the results of that. So is it about a perceived something that hasn't happened? Or is it about the reality of what we've seen so far in the length of time that the Lime scooters have been with us? I've had near misses. I've been very, 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 very close to getting bowled over myself. And I mean, this is just, it's about a behavioural change. And I think we do need to try and get our heads around this. But if we're going to be brutally honest, if we're talking about the health and safety of our residents, there's no point putting Lime scooters on the road, because we've seen the results of that.
Councillor O'Malley.
And we can't enforce it, so therefore we can set it all the way down to 0, and they can just flip us the middle finger just to shoot off at 30 Ks. So if we're trying to get a behavioural change and an appropriate way to share this footpath environment, because that's the legal environment they're allowed to work in right now, I think 5K is a ridiculously low speed. It's just going to be completely ignored, and therefore shoot ourselves in the foot entirely when it comes to trying to get a behavioural change on the footpath. That's 6 months is fine, I don't care.
Well, can I say I can't support this amendment for exactly the reasons that Councillor O'Malley mentioned with regard to speed. It just won't get anyone complying with it. And frankly, a large person on a scooter hitting you at 5K is probably not that much different from hitting you at 10, really. It's still going to hurt. And I think that if we want this trial to be meaningful, it has to be over all the seasons of the year. So I don't understand what's wrong with, personally, with 12 months. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Vandervis.
I'm not convinced that seasonality is a really strong argument, whether you're on a Lime in the winter or in the summer. I don't think it makes a lot of difference. I think that it does make a lot of difference that whatever the period we have should include a period when there's a lot of students here, since they're the ones usually using them, and certainly using them in the most spectacular fashion. My issue with the 12-month proposition is that it is perceived already, and I've had complaints already, as a permanent imposition. I don't think it's been intended to be that, but that's how a 12-month trial, so-called, is going to be perceived. What I believe we should do is we should go with pretty much what the recommendation is, but have a 3-month trial period, which we advertise as a genuine trial. It just runs for 3 months with the right of renewal if staff find that the data they get from the first 3-month trial period isn't really enough for them. I think most of the data you're ever going to get is going to be in the front end of the trial anyway. And if they wanted another 3 months, they could easily come to us and get that. That gets around the problem of us looking as though we are imposing a new regime on the public as a permanent imposition. So I don't believe that 5 Ks or 10 Ks is going to make really any difference. It's just going to be looking like an even more ridiculous imposition. I think we should go for what we have in front of us, 3 months and with the right renewal.
Well, I note that that is another suggestion. So in the event that this one fails, you're at liberty to move that as an amendment, because it's neither, it doesn't align with this amendment, and it's different to the agenda paper. So
it was the amendment that I tried to move right at the front end.
Well,
but
it's not a matter of what you tried to do. It's a matter of you either have to move it or it's not going to happen. So
I was not given the opportunity. You acknowledged it.
Right. I think everyone's given plenty of opportunity around here. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can live with the 6-month trial, but I won't be supporting the 5 kilometres. I think the biggest issue we have is the genie is out of the bottle and we're trying to find a way to stuff some of it back in. And I don't think I'd like to think that we have learnt a lot of lessons from the Lime scooters coming to town, and unfortunately we are having to deal with playing catch up consistently. The issue that I can understand with what we've got on the original document was we're trying to stay in line with what Auckland's doing, and we've got some basis to see how things are working. To me, makes a lot more sense. I can't see a lot of people agreeing to and worrying about whether they're doing 4Ks, 5Ks or 6Ks going down the road. I think the key thing being is we do have to get a full trial of 12 months. We are going to get pieces through the winter. I think we've got other issues more relating to Lime scooters, and that's when you've got 2 people on them, where they're being parked, etc. So I do applaud staff in trying to do the best they can with this paper, but yeah, I'll be sticking with the original motion.
Are there any further speakers to the amendment? Okay, I'm going to put the amendment as requested in 2... Oh, who moved that? Councillor Bettsmate, do you wish to speak to it?
Oh, just a comment in terms of the second part. Can we call it a 5 kilometre limit, please? And can we take them in 2 parts?
Yes.
Please.
So I'm going to take the speed qualification first, so that it reads, approves the trial on the, it's qualifying A by limiting the speed to 5K. Sorry, division? Right. It's easier.
Can I just understand, you just said something about the speed limit. The A isn't speed limit, is it, at the time? Oh.
No.
Oh, sorry.
There's 2 parts to the resolution on the paper. Both of these parts of this amendment qualify that. This is the first qualification, which is speed. It qualifies A on the order paper, not A.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think it would be clearer if this were expressed as approves the trial of a footpath courtesy zone in George Street and Princess Streets from Albany to Rattray, the limit being 5K. And then we'll vote on that, and then we'll vote on the trial length. But it's confusing to have 2 different A's and B's. Anyway, we know what we're voting on. We're voting on the amendment to limit the speed to 5K. It's a division.
B, so B, we're voting on B. Councillor Benson-Pope.
Councillor Elder. Councillor Gary.
No.
Councillor Hall. Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Lefiso. Councillor Lord. Councillor Newell.
No.
Councillor O'Malley.
No.
Councillor Staines.
No.
Councillor Steedman. Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Wiley.
No.
Councillor Wilson.
No.
Your Worship.
No.
7-4.
Okay, we're going to move on to the length of the trial, which has been, the amendment puts it at 6 months. We might as well do that by division 2.
Councillor Benson Pope. Councillor Elder. Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall. Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Lefiso. Councillor Lord. Councillor Newell. Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Staines. Councillor Steedman. Councillor Vandervis. Councillor Wiley. Councillor Wilson. Your Worship.
No.
Carried 9-6.
So now thank you, the substantive motion is that is only changed on the order paper by the inclusion of a 6-month limit to the trial. So we return to debate on that, and Councillor Vandervis, you're the next speaker.
I don't think actually that I need to say much more. I think we're all basically in agreement that 6 months is the way to go, but thank you for the opportunity.
Are there further speakers on this? Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Gary.
Mine is a procedural matter, and why I've got slightly confused with where we've been at. I'm not quite sure which order paper. When people are moving, I'd really recommend we actually say which recommendation or resolution we're passing, because I'm still looking for which resolution we're on, because the recommendation I had didn't refer to a speed limit at all in my papers, and that's why I'm still wondering whether we have to put the 15 kilometres speed limit in the actual resolution.
No. I didn't say that the resolution on the order paper did mention it. I said that the amendment qualified it in that regard. That was the effect of the amendment.
Yeah. No, okay, but so.
But
so we're not having to put the 15 k's in there now.
I don't think so. That was the understanding. That it was 15k, and that's what we were told. It's in the report. So. Okay. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. I voted against the 5 kilometre speed limit because I was concerned that we needed to make this effective, and as we can't enforce it, it has to be effective from an education perspective. And I was concerned that if we tried the 5 kilometre speed limit, it wasn't taken seriously, there was really no going back. We do have some room to move in this, but I do want to add that the perceived risk is really important to the people who perceive it as a risk. And there are people in our community, older people in our community in particular, and vulnerable people, who have said to me they don't come into the centre of the city anymore because they are really afraid of getting knocked down. And I come back to my point about whether you're knocked down at 15 or 5, it really doesn't make much difference, in fact. You still get hurt badly, which is not to say that I'm against Lime scooters, it's just we've got to find a way to accommodate them, and we're trying to do that. So I'm in support of us having a trial. I think 6 months is a good amount of time, but I would really urge councillors to understand that the perceived risk is worth noting.
Councillor Elder.
I too agree with Christine about perceived risk. There's people who feel vulnerable and fragile, and so it's really important that we look after them. The other risk I see still that isn't addressed is that, in fact, a lot of people with limited mobility or visual impairments are finding that the obstruction on the footpath is also a risk, and this isn't addressed in this. So I do support in the end the 6 month being a better time to review things, and hopefully the NZTA and the government have something coming out shortly that we can talk to. Thank you.
Speakers. Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Worship. I think what we're asking for here is goodwill, because we have absolutely no teeth at all, and the perceived risk, I understand that. But the other thing is we've got to work within the laws that we have at the moment, and the laws at the moment say that they can be there. I agree with you, if we made it 5 kilometres an hour, there's no way anyone would take it seriously. So we're asking for behavioural change, we're asking for people to be decent, and I think this trial is a wonderful way for us to sort of gently nudge people in the right directions in the same way that we have no smoking signs around playgrounds. I'm well aware of the damage that those things could do, but I'm also well aware of our legal ability to do anything about it. And it's about us trying to do the best we can within the constraints that we have. We've also heard that central government are set to do something within the 12 months, which I think the elephant in the room would be similar length to the trial that we're having, with the hope that the central government are going to come in and do something nationwide so we don't have to. I understand the risks that are involved, but this trial is a wonderful way for us to do something and try and do it without a heavy hand, because if we try to crack down too hard, we know what will happen. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley, you'll write a reply.
I think the word trial is probably what's causing a lot of confusion here, because in fact the trial normally indicates you're going to add something, whereas in fact we're just trying to really get some attitudinal change to occur in the city. So I just have a general appeal to those who are riding the scooters. Please don't ride too close to the building edges and frighten people, and consider that in fact, although the risk may not be real, a perceived risk does take away from someone's ability to enjoy themselves. So just be considerate to each other and we can probably all get along. And that's really what it comes down to in the end. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Now I'm going to move that we have an adjournment for a cup of tea. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. And we'll be back here at 10 to 4. Okay, we're on to item 16, the revocation of a resolution. And since this came from the Chief Executive and put it out, I'll move it from the Chair. Second to Councillor Staines. Obviously a procedural omission, and where it needs to be revoked to tidy things up. Speakers? There are none. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. On to item 17. This is the notice of motion. Councillor Benson Pope, this is your notice of motion. Do you have a seconder?
About 9.
All right.
Councillor Lord seconding, as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Now, I note that you've complied with the Standing Orders 23.3. These get more complicated by the day. Requirement to give notice, more than 5 days notice, blah, blah, blah. Right. Do you wish to speak to it?
Briefly, first of all, colleagues, can I apologise for my procedural error. I'm sorry I treated the revocation motion as an ordinary notice of motion, and that led to my qualifications as someone who was familiar with standing orders being thoroughly expunged, and I'm sorry that we've had to go through this extra procedure to tidy this up. I think that procedure was entirely appropriate, despite even though there was a legal opinion that made it clear, because of the weight of opinion, that the original decision would likely stand should it be challenged. I don't propose to say a great deal more. People will recall what I said at the previous meeting. This hasn't changed over a couple of weeks. This issue was a creature of a year and a half ago, and for all sorts of reasons that have been more than adequately explained to every councillor in this room, the work did not proceed. So no number of accusations about who did what to whom when changes the fact that this is not appropriate at this time, especially within a few months of an election, during an election period. And what's more, the process around local government reform, local government structure, is a statutory process in terms of the Local Government Act and the appropriate authorities, where there is a statutory process requiring extensive public consultation. Given the public consultation currently underway about pretty much everything in the city, I don't think it will be productive to suggest for a moment that we add another dimension to that. So I think it's appropriate to put this on the side and allow staff to focus on work of much greater priority.
Right. Now, before I come to speakers, can I just note that standing orders allow for questions of staff. in this instance, but through the chair. And I'll decide if it's appropriate and to whom it's appropriate to ask them, if there are any questions. And I suspect there won't be, because a good number of questions have been asked and answered in the recent weeks anyway. Councillor Vandevers.
It says on our order paper under 8 that the disadvantage is the time that would be taken away from completing other priority projects. Can the Chief Executive please explain why this project from more than 2 years ago lacks priority, given that it is central to the structure of local government, given that there is a clear government process that we can go through to achieve this, if that's what we want, and given that there is a great deal of public interest in this particular motion. Why is it low priority?
Now, as the question is through me, I'm going to suggest that if the Chief Executive has any more to add to what she already has told both all of the council at an ELT council meeting, at which you were present, the answer to this question, if she's got anything else to add to it, she can, but this question has been answered more than once.
Has it been answered publicly?
It has been answered more than once. This is not about public, this is about you're asking a question. Now, if you've got any more to add, no. So, have you got any other questions?
Has it been answered publicly?
Have you got any other questions?
Can you please answer the question I've just asked?
Given that most of the emails seem to circulate through half the population of the planet, yes, it has.
I don't believe that circulating emails through half the planet
if you've got any other
constitutes public reasons. I don't believe that we have actually had any reason, but I'll carry on. As well as claiming that it is not a priority project for reasons which the public have yet to see and which I have yet to comprehend and which I don't believe I've yet heard, it says here also in 8 that there is a risk to council-ORC relationship while there are critical joint projects underway. Is it not the case that we have had critical joint projects underway with the ORC for years, and as Councillor Benson Pope highlighted in his first attempt at this, that in fact there's a whole list of things that we are constantly talking to the ORC about, and that in fact that is a good reason for having a unitary council. So, what is the risk to council-ORC relationships, given that this is public anyway? What is it about the report that is so divisive that we cannot actually have it in public?
Well, again, if the Chief Executive has anything to add, then that has been answered as well, publicly.
Has it been answered publicly,
Yes,
Your Worship?
Yes, I believe it has.
I would like you to refer to when it's been publicly, because I haven't seen it.
I'm not here to answer your questions. If you've got any more, please ask them.
I don't believe you're here, Your Worship, to block my questions and to prevent them from being answered in public. We are in a public meeting currently. I am asking questions of the order paper. The questions I am asking relate specifically to the order paper. There is no standing order that allows you to prevent these questions from being asked and answered.
I've just explained it.
You're ultra vires. I'll carry on. On 9, it says that the advantage of not preparing this report is the time available to work on other priority projects. Please, what are the other priority projects? What have been the other priority projects for more than 2 years that didn't allow this project to go ahead?
As has been explained several times in emails, this item was put into the annual plan in February 2017. Work immediately began on the item. Some research was done into the process to become a unitary. towards mid-late in the year, there was a discussion because the policy staff who were writing this report were completely tied up with Section 17A reviews, with the LTP, with numerous other pieces of work that got referred to. I don't have the details on me. And so I took to the chairs meeting, who meet to prioritise projects because there is a pool between work reporting to various committees, that this work would be in my, ELT's assessment, but my assessment, completed during 2018. The chair said, take that to Councillor ELT meeting, which we did. So we informed people late in 2017 that this report would be done in 2018. During 2018, at the end of 2017, there was a government change. We got gifted the waterfront proposal. We got, and you have been told numerous times that the staff that would have worked on this report, include particularly Nicola and her team, are now working on the Provincial Growth Fund application work. So that has been answered several times. What we brought back to Council, there was a discussion amongst senior leadership team that the Provincial Growth Fund work was progressing in partnership with the Regional Council. That partnership was working very well, and that it might be a wise idea not to finish this work until after the Provincial Growth Fund work was complete. At that point, I put that on the agenda for the next Councillor ELT meeting and sought feedback at that meeting from you all, asking whether you were comfortable with that prioritisation, seeking feedback. A number of councillors spoke to the fact that they were comfortable with that. Nobody spoke to the fact that they were not comfortable with that. And so at that point, the work was put to one side until after the PGF fund work was complete. That was the major priority project. And there may be others, I don't know, you'll have to ask Ms Graham, who is in charge of the policy team, but that's the one that I'm referring to in particular because it is enormous. After that, that work was put aside. We anticipated at that point that the PGF fund decision from the government would be coming late in 2018 or possibly very early in 2019. And as you know, we're still waiting for the answer. So this did not get brought up again until you raised it by email in March.
For the record, when the Chief Executive approached me and asked me about delaying the release of this report, it was the release of this report in August of 2018 that I agreed to because of...
That is simply not true. The report was never complete. No, I'm sorry, Councillor Vandervis, you are mistaken.
As the mover of this motion,
that report was never complete.
To you not progressing its order.
Councillor, unless you have some reasonably good evidence to back what you've just claimed, you're going to need to withdraw it, because I have it on the CEO's word that that didn't happen, and I'm bound to accept it.
You have it on my word that it did, and in fact, you were in the room at the time, and I have your email regarding it.
Well, you've got two of us contradicting you now. So, all right. Are there any further speakers?
Point of order.
Point of order.
I think I heard you ask the member to withdraw the comment. He hasn't done so.
I will return to that. You have now stated something that both the Chief Executive and myself have unequivocally denied, and I'm asking you to withdraw it.
I cannot withdraw what I know to be untrue.
Then you're calling us dishonest, and you will leave the meeting.
I am saying that
you will leave the
I'm
meeting.
saying that my understanding is different from yours. I'm not saying that you're dishonest. I'm saying that what you understood from the conversation and that what I understood were different. That's all I'm saying.
Point of order.
Councillor, I'm saying there wasn't a conversation. So you've got one more chance. You withdraw it or you leave the meeting.
If you're saying there was no conversation, then I withdraw it.
It's fine. Any further speakers? Councillor O'Malley.
This is a question through the chair to the CEO. the assessment that moving forward with this report would in some way jeopardise our relationship with the ORC. If I go back to the original resolution, it asks for a high-level report to outline the advantages and disadvantages of becoming a unitary council. Could it not, that report, have actually come forward with disadvantages of forming unitary council, which then in fact would not be something that would be egregious to the ORC?
Possibly, but the work was not completed and was never finalised in a report. So we had an early round of well, what I like to characterise as reckons from a group of staff. So some ideas, some of which were directly contradictory of each other. So, for example, one staff member said they thought it was a very good thing that we might not have independent oversight, environmental oversight, and someone else said what would be a very bad thing is that we would not have independent oversight, environmental oversight, for example. So none of these issues were resolved because the work didn't get complete. It wasn't so much the relationship with the regional council that was of concern. What had happened is, for the first time, a partnership had been agreed to where all of the major agencies in town together were supporting the Provincial Growth Fund bid. In order for a Provincial Growth Fund bid to be considered by government, the expectation of government was clear that it required the commitment of all of the councils across the region. So what was said during the council at ELT lunch was this was not a particularly good time to jeopardise that work. We had the agreement of all of the councils across the region, even though they hadn't signed the MOU because of their regulatory responsibilities. That feedback came to the Mayor and I from the Chair and the Chief Executive. They had agreed to the partnership and they had written a letter in support of the PGF bid. That's what we didn't want to jeopardise and have that publicly displayed in jeopardy as the government was considering the PGF bid.
Would you agree that if the report had come back and said there are no advantages, then it would not have threatened a relationship? It would only have threatened a relationship if it said that it was a good thing to go forward with. But as it was incompleted, it could have either gone one way or the other. So simply asking the question, what are the advantages and disadvantages of going forward with this, is not in itself a presumption that you are going to go forward with it. Isn't it not, in fact, that you are asking what is the implications of going forward? And maybe once the report came back, we would say it's not worth going forward.
That is hypothetical, of course, because the work never got completed. So, however, in the draft, the thinking of staff, there were both pros and cons, some of which made sense, some of which were outrightly wrong, and others of which maybe would have been disagreed with by other staff. So it's probably fair to assume that writing a report that alludes to anything that may just make another entity disappear may not be well received by that entity, but that's also supposition.
Unless, of course, the report said it isn't worth doing and we shouldn't do it. So I just want to ask another question. This was moved, deprioritised for work to be done on the Provincial Growth Fund application. How many other council resolutions are currently outstanding?
I've got no idea.
Does anybody have a list of council resolutions that are outstanding?
Not here. If you'd emailed beforehand. Councillor Vandevers has sent that through as a request, but he said it was non-urgent. It's in the list of Lagoimas to answer.
But you don't have like a list sitting on your desk, obviously.
Now, before I come to the next speaker, Councillor Benson-Pope, I understand you raised a point of order. I'm not sure whether you let it lie or withdrew it, or you're comfortable. Right, Councillor Wilson.
I've got two questions for the CEO, if that's all right, through you, Your Worship. First one is it, since 2017, there's other layers of council that have worked or are working have joined up relationships with the ORC at different levels as well, thinking stormwater and transport, that have also, I think, improved relationships. Would that be something you agree with? Has also generated work between the agencies?
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say that in the last 5 or 6 years, the relationship with the ORC has generally improved. That's not a reason not to do the report, though, to be clear.
I appreciate it's not necessarily a reason to do the report, although it may well defray some of our frustrations that we may have expressed in 2017. The other question I had is, since 2017, I can think of a number of motions that we've put through, like bus hubs and like pedestrianisation of some areas that have also, we've also asked, we've moved them at council and we've prioritised them over that work. Are those things that in you allocating work frustrate and make it problematic that we can't, it's generated from our decisions that you have to prioritise work. It's not as though you're sitting there with innumerable staff waiting to get work loaded on from us.
That's right. I mean, occasionally we do think, oh, we haven't progressed something. It's not very often we think there's a good reason to do something in a particular time order or after something, unless it is the same staff working on it. And we have pushed back to you a few times to say we simply cannot do that work and that work and that work, for example. And then we make decisions. Sometimes work comes off the work programme.
Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, if it's acceptable to you, I have a question around a memory of a resolution that went through around working with the ORC in regards to harbour matters. And my recollection is that at the time, the Chief Executive said that it couldn't be a priority because of workload. And I just wondered if my recollection was correct.
Actually, there were two pieces, one of which has progressed and one isn't. One was a report that Councillor Wilson asked for into Harbour Edge assets probably 4 years ago, and that piece of work has not moved very far at all, but there is still discussions about when it goes on the work programme. And the second piece was an investigation into harbour assets. The discussion, we had a very good discussion with the Regional Councillor, who, as you're aware, has appointed a new harbour master, and he's had the first of the meetings, of his planned meetings, and there's another one due. Well, if it hasn't just happened, it's just about to, a second meeting with some of the key Harbour Edge stakeholders to progress that work. So in actual fact, the piece of work is being progressed as a collaboration between us and the Regional Council, but led by the Regional Council staff person, the Harbour Master. So our staff aren't working on that.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that it was actually...
Sorry, that's Sandy's advising me she can pull some information off the system and give you an answer about resolutions. So
Thank you. So going back to my question, but I do recall correctly that at the time you said, look, we just can't do this at the moment because of the work programme. Is that correct? So my second question is around workload, because I certainly have been aware with my involvement with Enterprise Dunedin of the workload that the Provincial Growth Fund in terms of their involvement has prompted. Could you explain for us, if Your Worship's happy for the Chief Executive to do so, just the kind of workload we're talking about?
It's difficult for me to describe that. Perhaps the most useful thing might be to describe, we've just done the latest staff satisfaction survey and we're just starting to get some of the high-level feedback through, and one of the things that is most commonly mentioned is what staff are reporting having an extremely high workload at present, and the consultants who did the survey pointed out to us that they do numerous councils, they do these surveys for numerous councils, and have pointed out the unusually high level of commentary from our staff about the level of their workload. We know we're pushing people quite hard at the moment.
Councillor Elder.
In some ways, would you say that putting forward the idea of a unitary council would enable us to explore closer relationship, or an outcome of that could be exploring a closer relationship?
I think we're getting off the subject here.
Okay.
So the subject is whether we revoke this resolution, and that what you're raising is the arguments and issues that would have been brought up right at the beginning, and
okay.
I really think that we're getting a bit broad here.
And the other thing is, with the community boards, there's they all have action plans, and One of the things I was thinking about was, is it possible for us to have resolutions under our papers so that we can track resolutions?
Sandy, I think Sandy's the appropriate one to answer this. Yeah.
How about now? There we are. Marvellous. Sorry, what about now? Partly to clarify the question that Councillor O'Malley had previously asked as well. If you recall, councillors, in October last year, a report was presented to ISCOM which showed resolutions and progress against it. Now that was a test of what the Info Council system will do, and we are looking to do that more formally as a process. That does require that staff go in and update the actions they've undertaken on the resolution. So yes, it is possible. The challenge at the moment is, and it's like catch-22, staff have been so busy they've been doing the work but not going in and updating the status of those resolutions. So we are working on that and hope to have a system whereby all of the current resolutions that have not been closed are provided to council with a status on their update by committee and by council.
Thank you for that, Sandy.
But does that include from community boards or just from council and committees?
It's for council. Community boards are managed slightly differently because they don't have the ability to direct staff in the same way that the committees and council do.
So they get an answer. Generally, they raise action points, and then the committee secretary's report goes back and says, here's the actions on the action points.
What I just like is that they track the resolutions so they don't lose them, and it's quite easy to remember.
If I might, it's a slightly different thing than we're talking about, and it's far easier to manage because it's more discreet and it involves things that are far more localised. Was the rubbish bin in that park clean, that kind of thing. The broader resolution tracking is a work underway, and we will look to update that. We were doing it anyway, but following the Lagoima request, we will look to provide that.
Councillor Newell. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Worship. A question for the CEO. Was a draft report ever presented to the CEO or Chair of ORC?
No, and I emailed you all today after I heard that suggestion made or heard that it had been made online. No, the draft report has never been circulated as far as we can find. Certainly not by any of my emails because I've been back and checked, but as far as we're aware, that draft report was never circulated outside of this building. As far as we can ascertain, given that we were only told that that allegation was being made a couple of days ago, we haven't had time to check everybody's emails, but the author, all of ELT, and certainly me, have never ever provided that report to either the current Chief Executive or anybody else at the ORC, staff or elected members.
Thank you.
And I can see the odd smirk around the room. If you think we did, for heaven's sake, provide us with the evidence, because there's no reason it should have gone outside the building. The work was not complete. And it's ugly as it currently stands. It's ugly. The pros and cons have no standing. As I said, some of them are wrong and some of them are not sensible. So why on earth we'd share it with anyone is beyond me.
Good speakers. Then who moved this? No, that was the debate, and questions could be asked in it. That's what I said right at the start. That during, what I said was, during a debate, members can ask staff questions, and it had been moved and seconded, so those that have spoken have spoken.
Excuse me, you've asked the question?
No.
I now reserve my right to speak.
No, Councillor. What I said at the beginning was, for your information, it had been moved and seconded, and I said, for your information, now I ask for speakers. Councillor Vincent Pope, as the mover, spoke to it, and I said, just for your information, during the debate, and I read it because I have the notes here, members can ask staff questions. You were the first speaker.
I was the first question asker.
You were the first speaker.
And I've asked my questions. I now reserve the right to have my opportunity for debate.
You don't.
The debate that was closed down
No.
the last time
You
this
do.
was done in this council forum against all morality, against standing orders, and with your connivance.
Councillor, you're out of order.
Are you going to let me speak to this debate or not?
Oh, you have.
I have not. I've simply asked questions.
Please sit. Please sit.
I wish to speak to the debate.
Please sit. Point of order.
Your Worship, I heard what you said, and I have it here, that you asked us to note, under Standing Orders 20.3 states the following: during a debate, members can ask staff questions about the matters being discussed. Questions must be asked through the chairperson, and the questions should be dealt with at the chairperson's discretion. So that, to me, my interpretation is that you told the meeting that you could ask questions during the debate.
Exactly what I said, and you were the first speaker.
And we are still in debate, as I understand it.
No, you've spoken. You have a right to speak once, and you've spoken. Please sit down.
Why-
Councillor Benson-Pope, do you wish to exercise?
Why do you differentiate between questions and debate here?
I already explained it. And I'm going to...
It's an obscene, again, denial of the ability to speak, as per the last time.
Councillor, you should listen more than you speak, and you'd understand the instructions that were given right at the beginning of the debate. Now I'm going to put it, actually we'll do it by division.
I know what's happened, and I know very well what's in that.
Councillor Benson-Pope. Councillor Elder. No. Councillor Gary. Aye. Councillor Hall. Aye. Councillor Hawkins. Aye. Councillor Lefiso. I thought you said abstain. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Councillor Lord. Aye. Councillor Newell. No. Councillor O'Malley. No. Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Statement.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Wiley.
No.
Councillor Wilson.
Aye.
Your Worship.
Aye.
Carried 10-5.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on to item 18, update on the trade waste bylaw review. Who's going to join us? Aye. Welcome, Mr. Dyer. Mr. Drew. You wish to introduce this, or do you want to go straight?
Straight to questions, thank you.
Right. Questions, councillors? This is quite a chunky bit of review. Any questions on it? Councillor Vandervis.
When we're talking about the recommendations here and the Regional Council to manage discharge of trade waste and stormwater in combination with the proposed bylaws, how does that relate to, for instance, Ravensdown's consents? And I think there are 7 of them to discharge into the harbour, and they also have some consents to discharge into air. So could you please explain, with reference to that situation, how this would work?
So in this case, the trade waste bylaw is targeted at managing discharges to the sewer system, so the foul sewer system. The stormwater provisions within that, within the existing trade waste bylaw, are very general and talk rather to urban discharge of a number of different kinds. In this case, Ravensdown have specific discharge consents with the ORC that would fall outside of the provisions of the existing bylaw structure. The new bylaw structure, obviously yet to be written, if you approve the recommendations that are in the report, the stormwater bylaw will need to consider how existing discharge consents from other entities within the urban environment, especially those that are linked to our stormwater system, are considered and managed, but that would be a piece of work that would come a little bit later on.
So just to clarify, if we go ahead with with the recommendations here, and there's 4 of them, the waste bylaw that's proposed, would it catch the consents or the discharges that are already produced by, for instance, Ravensdown? Or would they be kept separate, and the consents that they have with the regional council would allow them to continue? What I want to know is this bylaw going to actually interfere with the separate discharge consents with the ORC? It's another one of those situations where the DCC and the ORC really should be the same entity.
So in this case, it is unlikely that stormwater bylaw would interfere with those existing discharge consents.
So if they are discharging to the stormwater system, this bylaw won't apply to them. Is that what you're saying? Because they have a regional council consent.
If they are discharging to the stormwater system, in this case I don't believe that they are, then there would be some overlap, and we would need to work out how the bylaw accommodated those things and worked in parallel with the ORC. But I don't believe that Ravensdown directly discharged to our stormwater system, and therefore wouldn't be covered by the bylaw. They would be covered by discharge consents that the ORC holds, so discharge to the environment consents, which are the same or similar consents that we hold for discharging stormwater to the harbour.
But they would be caught by discharges to the foul water system, which they do have.
Which are different discharges, so the trade waste bylaw would pick up those discharges.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you're not going to have to rework all the consents that they currently have with the ORC for this to go ahead?
No, we would not.
Right, sorry, it took a wee while to get there. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Your Worship. I understand the trade waste, and I had the joy of listening to Lou Voyages. Some of my colleagues around the table remember him coming along and telling how he used to empty all the contents of his rubbish bin through his incinerator to discharge. And it does occur to me that there are some people who use the incinerator system in possibly a way that's greater than a trade waste. And many businesses use trade waste, and I'm just wondering about the fairness of that, because my understanding is that incinerators can be causing as much, if not more, problems than some trade waste.
At this stage we class those types of discharge as domestic, so therefore not falling under the trade waste bylaw. I couldn't comment as to exactly how much of the proportion of the city's waste is received via incinerators, or how that relates to our trade waste bylaw and the provisions that are in there for managing discharge of solids and all of that sort of thing. But we are looking at, so we presented a paper earlier this year about ownership and looking at our systems and all of how we interrelate with customers and how customers can interrelate with the systems that we manage, and that process could end up looking at a broader wastewater bylaw that would be targeting and managing the behaviours of those domestic connections as well. At this stage, we are not proposing, we haven't done the work yet to propose a broader wastewater bylaw. And so at this stage it's not necessarily on the table, but those kind of discharges would fall within that.
One of my reasons for being interested is the discussion earlier today in the public forum, and other discussions we've had in the last wee while about organic waste and where and how we treat it and what its effect is on climate change as well and greenhouse gases. And if this is just being dumped and methane collected or buried or whatever, because at the end, or burnt, as we were given the example today, it's just understanding how we are treating that and how big a picture it is. How can you find out how many incinerators there are and how big a short part of the trade waste, or sorry, part of the waste stream it might be?
So short of doing a survey, that would be our only provision. They're not a consented activity under the Building Act or any other thing.
Councillor Lord.
Thank you, Worship. Tom, I just had a question, and it really isn't relating to the quality of trade waste, but it relates to an individual's right to capture their stormwater off their roof and use it for irrigation of their garden and that sort of thing. At the moment, is that a permitted activity? So could anyone just divert the water off their roof into a 5,000 litre tank or something like that?
It is, I believe, a permitted activity under the district plan, but I think you require a building consent for the work to, so the drainage work and the pipes and tanks and all of that sort of thing. I think that requires a building consent.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tom, in reading through this paper, one of the things stood out to me was that if we knew a little bit more about what was going through the system in the sense of like sensors or things like that, would that be a positive thing?
Yes, it would. We do monitor the wastes that move through our network periodically and continuously in some wastewater treatment plants. But it's something we're also looking at increasing our knowledge of at the moment as well through various types of sensors and other monitoring.
So I guess you're referring to a bit like what we've read in the press about the evidence of drugs going through wastewater treatment plants and things like that.
Yes, and it's also very useful to understand the influence that's coming in when you're designing a new treatment plant such as Green Island, and I think we've recently put out we're about to put out a tender for looking at additional monitoring programs and all that sort of thing as well. We also increased budgets this year for sampling within treatment plants and influent, which you'll be looking at through the annual plan over the next wee while.
Okay, so back in early 2017, late 2016, early 2017, Jesse Teat at Tussock Innovation put a mud tank sensor together and then went on to Barcelona and was quite widely acclaimed at a couple of international shows. Do we still use that? Is that being actively used across the city?
So I met with Tussock late last year and have actually just received another email today to meet again and discuss some more technology. I don't believe we have any of their sensors in our stormwater or wastewater network because they were designed for river monitoring, but they are looking at new technology, and we consider that sort of thing all the time.
Is there anybody internationally that has got use of sensors through the wastewater system or the waste?
Yes, there are a number of different utilities that are quite advanced in that space. It is expensive technology, and typically an investment in that speaks to a need to invest in other parts of your network.
Or using a good local company?
Yeah, correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Laufisa.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Mr Drew and Mr Dyer. I'm just looking at the summary considerations and engagement external, and I note that there were 23 written responses received in terms of your surveying of 800 people. I know you weren't here 10 years ago, but is the level of response, that low level of response, usual when we're considering bylaws?
I'm not too sure of the answer to that question. I think what you see here is probably a symptom of the number of people or entities within the city who are actually broadly affected by the bylaw and therefore engaged. This bylaw has quite a specific coverage. It doesn't typically affect the bulk of our residents.
Councillor O'Malley.
Very much, Chair. The question is around the stormwater bylaw that you're moving forward with. Is that in conjunction with the proposed ORC's urban freshwater policies coming out, and is that why we're going down that path?
One of the reasons, but there are many other good reasons for a specific, so like I said before, the coverage of the trade waste bylaw is quite narrow. It talks about high risk and medium risk and low risk trade waste users. Now those high risk ones are few, but managed very actively, and they all understand and use the bylaw quite regularly, whereas the bulk of Dunedin's residents would have very little interest in the trade waste bylaw more generally, whereas a stormwater bylaw would be active in trying to manage behaviours right across the city. It is also timely that work is occurring at the Regional Council, and timely that we're coming up to some consent reviews as well. But,
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. The question I was asking was similar to Marie's, just about the feedback you did get on the changes and what people felt about it.
So the feedback is summarised in attachment B and attachment C. Broadly, the feedback was positive and supported, with some changes suggested, the biggest change being reflected in the recommendation in terms of splitting the trade waste and stormwater bylaw.
Right, any other questions? Councillor Wilson. So move Councillor Wilson. There's a second, Councillor O'Malley. Thank you. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to speak to it? No. Councillor O'Malley. Any speakers? In that case, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.
Because we think your last resolution was problematic.
I'm going to, thanks guys, at the request of the Chief, I'm going to move an adjournment for 5 minutes. Seeing the Councillor Staines, all those in favour please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.